Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads-ish. Mostly I'm going to be talking about the books I read in 2023 that I didn't like, the ones that were the least successful reads for me. Your mileage may vary. Ordinarily, when I do a Friday Reads video, I have a timestamp in the description box so you can jump to the Friday Reads portion of the video if you want to skip the chatty part in the beginning. This time, I'm going to have a timestamp down below if you want to jump to the worst reads of 2023. I think this is going to be a short video, but I figured it would make sense to actually do the Friday Reads portion first because there's just not a whole lot to talk about in terms of my reading, and then we'll get to the worst books of 2023 that I read. And again, your mileage may vary. I think it's really important to note that. I always struggle with whether or not to do a worst books video, which is why I don't do a separate video. I think lumping it into a Friday Reads feels about right because it's important to acknowledge that not every book works for you. So I always end up deciding to do something, but I always feel uncomfortable about doing it. So that's why it's lumped into a Friday Reads video. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. Happy New Year. This is the first Friday Reads that I am filming in 2024. Again, this should be a short one because, it's been a week. Back to work. I wasn't supposed to go back to work until Wednesday, but ended up, stuff did come up and I had to go back to work on Tuesday and have like a full day, and it's just been go, go, go ever since. So it's been a crazy week from that perspective. I did manage to get that time off. I explained in my last Friday Reads of the year that every year, technically, we are supposed to be working. Like, we're monitoring email. And if something happens, we would have to work and respond to it. So far, every year, it's been very quiet, and that has been good. But I did have to go back to work a day early, and it's fine. But it's just been a busy week for that. The other thing that's been going on is that this is something that I've noticed has happened to me pretty much every year since I have been on BookTube. The first week of the year, I have a very hard time getting my reading life going. And I think part of it is that you're sort of in that vacation mode and that end of year feeling you're just kind of coasting and being cozy and all of that. So I think it's hard to rev up your engine and get going again. And I think part of me, like on a subliminal level, also knows that because I have a BookTube channel, it feels like there's a lot of accountability to keep reading, and all year long, I feel that accountability because if I'm not reading, I don't really have much to talk about, and I could talk about making like limited progress, but it doesn't feel the same. So there's an accountability measure built into having a BookTube channel, and I feel that pressure every day of the year for the most part. Not to a bad degree, but it is there, is all I'm saying. And I think in the first week of the year, it's easy for my brain to acknowledge, you've got plenty of content. I hate using the word content, but it is what it is. You've got plenty of content for your channel without reading right now, because beginning of January, got to do best books of 2023, which will be linked down below. Best nonfiction books of 2023, which will be linked down below. This is my worst books of 2023, and coming on Monday, I believe on Monday, I haven't figured out scheduling, but I have it filmed, almost best books of 2023 will be coming. And then I'm going to be filming a video about my most anticipated books of 2024. I already have the list, I just need to film it. So, there's a whole lot of stuff that I can do for this channel without actually having books that I have finished to talk about. And I think mentally and emotionally, I sort of lean into that, and it does feel good. But it does also mean that it's just really hard to rev up your engine and get reading going. So I had a lot of misadventures with books this week. I still have a pile of the ones that I considered. I basically stopped and started and gave up on a lot of books that I got like 2 to 3 pages in because I just have had a very hard time figuring out what I'm in the mood to read, which for a mood reader is kind of devastating. It tells me I'm just not in the mood to read. So, because you'd think there would be something. I tried a bunch of different genres and ideas, and nothing was taking. I barely even made progress in the audiobook that I'm listening to, which actually I forgot to grab a copy of, so let me do that right now. All right, so here's just a sampling of some of the journeys that I took. I had been thinking that it would be super easy to just begin the year with this tiny little thing, Morning and Evening, translated by Damien Searles, but written by Jan Fosse, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year. And the thing is, like you can see, my bookmark is still in there on page 11. That's as far as I got. Although I will say, I don't think it starts on page 1. It starts, that's actually 3 pages in. So it's a little heavier than I expected, and I just really was thinking, as tiny as this is, as much as I could power through this, if I try to power through it, I'm not going to be doing the book any justice. So I might as well put it down. I have it for another 2 weeks because I'm able to renew it. So let me just wait and get back into reading, and then this will be a kind of gimme book that I can revisit at some point. I picked up a bunch of other things, then alternately put them down and just said, you know what, I'm just really not in the mood to read. I had this idea, well, why don't I try something Irish and Scottish, since I want to read Irish and Scottish books before I go to Ireland and Scotland in May. So I thought Mayflies, perfect, by Andrew O'Hagan. And I didn't even start it. Like, I carried this book around for 2 days and never actually turned to the first page at all. So I just kind of had to say, maybe I should turn to something else. And I thought, well, let me go back to the novella idea. Maybe like a queer novella, something that's not as heavy or dense as a Nobel Prize winning book. And I thought about the list of Little Sisters classics that I have on my shelf and picked up Franny, the Queen of Provincetown. And I read the first page, got to the end of it and realized I hadn't been paying attention, went back to the beginning of the first page, and I just put it down and acknowledged, all right, even this is not going to happen. So what should I do? The answer, I think, it's still early times, but I think I found the answer completely by accident. I walked into my local used bookstore. So I've been hearing great things about Barbara Pym for a while. I had talked to Sean the Book Maniac like 2 years ago at this point, and he recommended Some Tame Gazelle as a good starting point. And I haven't done it because the audio is on Scribd, but I guess part of me is always thinking, like, what? Maybe that would be a fun book to read in print. I don't know. And I just haven't prioritized it. Well, lo and behold, my local used bookstore all of a sudden had like half a shelf of Barbara Pym books. And they took up half a shelf because a bunch of them were hardcovers and therefore much more expensive. None of them were Some Tame Gazelle, though. So I took a picture of the books that they had, sent it to Sean the Book Maniac, and he came back and mentioned his favorite books, and some of them were there. So one of them was a hardcover and more expensive, so I didn't get that one. The one I got instead was Crampton Hodnet by Barbara Pym. I kind of am loving this vintage-looking cover, real cute. He said one of the more popular books by Barbara Pym is Excellent Women, but it's not his favorite. Well, they had a copy of Excellent Women, and I almost didn't get this because, and I'll talk more about this in a book haul, but it's a little flimsy, but it was $1.75. So I grabbed it. And then I was looking at them after I got home, and I thought, well, maybe Barbara Pym. Arbitrarily, I chose Crampton Hodnet and read the first page and kept going. So I think Barbara Pym is what's going to get me out of this mental and emotional doldrum I'm having with reading right now. Because the first chapter read very easily. Now, I want to mention something really quickly. And I'm really not far into this book, so I don't actually know if this is a success story, but I'm on page 19. Beginning chapter 3, I think. Every chapter begins with this illustration. This will be important in a second. It's a really cute illustration. I love it. So I got to the chapter where I am, and this is one thing that can be fun about used books. Somebody colored it in. I just find that so delightful. At first I was like, oh wow, it's so weird that this one would be in color and none of the others. And then I looked at it and realized this is crayon. So that was just a really fun surprise. I almost want to color one of the chapters in myself because I feel like that's just a fun, I don't know. I was so delighted when I saw that. Anyway, this seems to be the thing that is going to get my reading going in 2024. It's been a journey to find it. And fully realize that I'm filming this on Friday, January 5th. It's weird to talk about it having been such a journey when we're only 5 days into the year. But again, when you have a booktube channel, you feel that accountability to keep reading, so you have something to talk about. So the fact that I couldn't really get my reading going for 5 days says a lot. And I'm still going slowly. Like, I read the first chapter of this 2 days ago now. So again, I'm filming this on Friday, January 5th. I read the first chapter on Wednesday, and then I actually read 2 chapters yesterday. So maybe we're making progress. We'll see. But I think this is the book that is going to start my year off in print. I've also really not made much progress on audio. So Marsha Johansson, a subscriber, hi, gifted The Christmas Orphans Club by Becca Freeman to Joel in December last year. And he read it and he really liked it. He actually read the book, I believe. And I decided to do it on audio, so I cashed in a credit on Libro because I figured this would be a fun way to launch the new year. But I just haven't really been in the mood to listen either. So I'm sort of stuck at 11% and haven't made any progress at all. But it's a really cute book. I'm looking forward to continuing. And, you know, Christmas always lives in my heart. So I know a lot of other people are totally sick of it at this point, and that's fine. But I'm going to keep it going just one more week. And I'll work on the audio on that. And then maybe between these 2 books, I can get my reading year going for 2024. That's what I have going on in the Friday Reads world. Let's move to the worst books of 2023. And again, I always struggle with the idea of this because one thing that I'm trying to sort out, and I don't have an answer right now, is what level of negativity to include on my channel in general. Because one thing I really, really have started resisting the longer I've had my channel is being harsh on books, because there are things that other people like that I might not. So I will talk about the books that I liked the least in 2023. However, I think it's important to acknowledge this is entirely my opinion. So you might like these books, and that's fine. You can have a very different response to them. I can have a very different response to them. It's okay. And I don't really subscribe to the notion that there are some people who just say, well, I don't want to be negative, so I just don't talk about things that I don't like on my channel. But that's not realistic. You know, even with books that I like, I can usually find like one little detail that's like, well, this kind of didn't work for me, but I really liked the overall book. Like, it's just not the way the world works. Like, there are things that you don't like. It's just important not to weaponize the things you don't like and assume that other people should agree with you. So that's where I sort of struggle. I hope that makes sense. I did decide to do my worst books because I think the ones that I'm naming as my worst reads of 2023, I feel like I have valid reasons for naming them my worst reads of 2023. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. But again, that's fine. So I have a couple of three, I think, different categories. And I also want to talk about the DNFs. I only have 2 for 2023, which I feel pretty impressed about. And there is a sort of asterisk there because I skim read Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg, so it wouldn't be a DNF, but I definitely didn't do justice to the last part of the book. So let's start with some of the minor categories, and we'll work our way up to the worst. And again, this is a tough one. It's biggest disappointment. And what I want to explain before we talk about the books is that disappointment means it didn't live up to an expectation that I had. Again, you might think differently. So it's not necessarily that it's a bad book. It's just that it didn't live up to my expectation or what I sort of expected it to be. And the first one is The Furrows by Namwali Serpell. It was one of the New York Times top 10 books of last year. It seemed like there was a case to be made that it could be a Pulitzer contender, so I wanted to read it before the Pulitzer Prize was announced last year. And ultimately, it was not among the finalists. But basically, it's supposed to be a story about grief. And you have a protagonist who sees visions of the brother that she lost as a child. And what the book actually is it keeps sort of repeating scenarios and you don't actually know the truth. And that's interesting. But the second half of the book has a wild departure and introduces another character. And that part of the book was not what I expected. at all because everybody really only talked about the premise of the first half of the book. And when this other character came in, it really changes the dynamic of the book. And I didn't think it worked at all. And I just hadn't known about that part of the book because nobody had talked about it. So I'm counting it as a biggest disappointment. But again, I had very high expectations for this book and it didn't meet them. And that's fine. But also, I think when people talked about the story being a story about a grief about a brother and all of that, and then you get there and there's this other character who sort of comes in, I really wasn't prepared for that. And I didn't enjoy it. So there's that. And then I came up with the category a couple of years ago of Nothing Burger. And basically what that means is a book that I don't really even remember. And I have 3 books that I will want to mention in this section. The first one is A Lesson in Dying by Anne Cleeves. I honestly couldn't even tell you what that book is about. Now, I did listen to it on audio, and I listened to it while we were in Pullman getting radiation treatment for my dog Jameson, who we lost in August. I could not even tell you what it was about. All I remember is that I think Anne Cleeves it was her first book, and her skill as a writer has definitely progressed over time. By the way, I should also mention, it seems appropriate that I wore my 1-star review t-shirt from Montana Book Company, which is a store I love. So that just goes to show how objective things are. I didn't do that on purpose. I was just looking at it and realized. But anyway, I don't remember anything about that Anne Cleeves book. And I think she's definitely gotten better as a writer since. I'll still read some of her current books, but I'm a little hesitant to go back and do some of the early ones again. His Family by Ernest Poole. If I hadn't done a deep dive on this book, which I will link down below, it's the first Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction. I probably wouldn't remember anything about it because details are still escaping me at this point. And it just feels like you read it and you kind of think, okay, the first of anything feels like it should be important. So when you read this, it's just like, okay, sure. And even with the deep dive, now that I'm about a year out from having read it, details are really slipping from my mind. And then the other one is something I read around the same time as the Anne Cleeves book, Rumpel Rests His Case by John Mortimer. I had this book for such a long time. Now, I did try to trade this in at my local used bookstore, which is why there's a little sticker that says try again, because that means we're not going to take it right now, but try again later. I honestly couldn't even tell you. This is a short stories. They're supposed to be mysterious, but they're not really. I honestly couldn't tell you what a single one of them is about. So those are the 3 books that I would label Nothing Burgers, meaning just that they're already fading from my memory. So in another year's time, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you anything at all about them. And then the DNFs. Let's talk about them. First one was Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. Now, the book itself was not bad. The real problem was the length of the book. The audio, I don't remember how long it is, but it's like over 24 hours. And it just felt like, I think I got 8 or 9 hours in, and it felt like the book was still doing setup. And at that point, I was like, no, I can't do this. So, not really a judgment against the book. It's more that I just really didn't feel invested in the story enough to keep going for that long, especially when it felt like it was still doing setup at a point in the book where many other books would be ending. So nothing against Chuck Wendig. I know Charlie in particular from Montana Book Company is a huge fan of Chuck Wendig. He did an event with them. Seems like a very cool person. Fun follow on social media. But I just didn't have the patience for the book. And I know a lot of people who have read Wanderers and loved it. I just didn't feel invested enough to keep going at that point. The other one was Holler Child by LaToya Watkins. And that I got about 50 or 75 pages into it. It's a short story collection. And I just really wasn't in the mood to read it. So I felt like I was trying to force myself to keep going. It was a library book, and I just thought, why am I doing this? Forcing myself to read it isn't going to make me enjoy the book. It's probably only going to harm my experience of the book. So I returned it to the library. So it's kind of unfortunate that it counts as a DNF, but here we are. All right, let's really quickly just rip off the Band-Aid and talk about the worst. By the way, yes, I do have a huge pile of books here. It has nothing to do with this. It's something else. Ignore that. All right, let's talk about the worst. I have 2. First one, if you follow along, will be absolutely no surprise. Rabbit Run by John Updike. I hated this book. Hated it, hated it, hated it, hated it. Again, your mileage may vary. I know there are fans of John Updike out there, but to me, this just... So basically, John Updike saw a lot of the changes that were happening in the United States, in society, in the first half of the 20th century, and wrote a book complaining about them. And the ending really made me mad. So, spoilers, skip ahead a minute if you don't want them. Basically, John Updike is saying when people don't go to church anymore, and when people don't respect the sanctity of marriage or take life seriously, babies die. Yeah, and it's like, oh, John Updike, no. I only managed to finish this book because I was doing it as a buddy read with Danny, who is that bookish bear on Instagram. And by the end, we were just sort of making fun of John Updike and how he's just a cranky white guy about social progress, essentially. And I did actually try to exchange this at my local used bookstore. It was in the same grouping. So basically there was a rubber band around these books to try again at another point. But I took the rubber band off to do this video. So I feel stuck, or felt stuck. I decided what I'm going to do, because as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, I had told myself that if a book that won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction is part of it, had books that were written before it, and it's part of a series, I would at least try to read the books that came before it. And John Updike won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for fiction. He's one of only 4 people to do that. For the 2 final books in the Rabbit Angstrom series. This is Rabbit Run is the first, and I hated it aggressively. So now I have at least 2 more John Updike books that I kind of have to read for my Pulitzer Prize project, or at least attempt to read, because I did DNF Gone with the Wind. Hated that book too. But yeah, the energy is totally just cranky white man complaining about social progress and making it seem like it will shatter society if these things are allowed to continue, or if we don't go back to the way things were. And no thank you. The second book also sounded awful. So I actually have pulled the second book from my shelf because I was torn. It's like, should I attempt to read the second book, which is called Rabbit Redux, or do I just get rid of it? Because I wanted to exercise this from my house like a demon when it was done. And I decided I'm not going to read Rabbit Redux. Because I looked up the description of the book on Wikipedia. I don't want to do that. No, thank you. No, thank you at all. Rabbit Angstrom starts a commune in his house. And basically the premise of the book is like, so this was published in 1960. And Rabbit Redux was published somewhere around 1971, 72. So basically, John Updike saw the big social upheaval that happened in the 60s and, the big civil rights movements and things like that, and wrote a book to complain about them. I don't have time for that. I do not have time for that. That is such a soft landing, because it landed on Teddy's bed. But anyway, yeah, I don't have time for that. So, not a fan. Again, if you like John Updike, that is fine. I don't think I'm ever going to get along with him. So I'm going to relieve myself from the obligation of reading Rabbit Redux. I will attempt Rabbit is Rich at some point. I might just try to rip off the Band-Aid at some point in 2024 and get that over with. We shall see. The other book I'm counting as a worst is The Netanyahus, an account of a minor and ultimately even negligible episode in the history of a very famous family. This is another Pulitzer Prize for fiction winner. And so I read this leading up to the announcement of the Pulitzer Prize last year, so I could get ready for the new book that would be anointed. And then about a month or 2 months later, I finished The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and I just got really upset and angry on behalf of Honoré Fanon Jeffries, because it feels like this one, and you had this masterpiece. I don't get it. Again, there are people who like the Netanyahus. Clearly the Pulitzer jury, clearly the Pulitzer board. And that's fine. I didn't like it. And I think that this is a book that is aging shockingly badly, especially when you look at the news these days. Because this is a book that was, and I talk about this in my Pulitzer Prize deep dive, which will be linked down below. But this is a book that assumes that the political legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu is over. And by the time the book won the Pulitzer, Netanyahu had returned to power. And again, You've seen the news. You know what's happening. So, again, I just feel like this book is aging very badly, very quickly. So the first half of the book is about a professor in a New York college in the early 1960s. Okay, so it's winter 1959, heading into 1960. This professor is Jewish. He is the only Jewish faculty member. I don't think there are any Jewish students, so he and his family are really the only Jewish people in this town. If this book didn't have the Netanyahus at all, it would have been interesting, I think, because the first half of this book is interesting and good and makes some really astute points about this professor's life and how he has to sort of go along to get along. There are all of these microaggressions that he experiences and just has to swallow because he can't fight back or push back. He has to put up with all of them, and he is expected to behave in a way that makes him an acceptable Jewish person to these people around him who are not Jewish. And then the book takes this wild turn into being cartoonish around the time the Netanyahu... It actually happens the night before the Netanyahus show up, because he has this wild dream sequence that is outlandish and weird. And then the Netanyahus show up, and they're just the cartoon characters. And Benjamin Netanyahu is a child in this book, so he's a small presence in the family. But it's meant to mirror Donald Trump as well, and Donald Trump's father. So the Netanyahu's the primary character in this book is actually like Donald Trump's father-esque. I think one of the things that's difficult about this book is that you have these two opposing viewpoints between Netanyahu and the professor about what it is to be a Jewish person in the world. And it feels like the book wants you to take Netanyahu's side, even as he's painted as a sort of ridiculous, conceited, awful person. And I really didn't like that. Especially when it just feels like you have this really interesting, quiet professor character that I just wanted the book to be the focus of. And the more it felt like it wanted you to be on Netanyahu's side, the more I resented and resisted the book. So here we are. And I have to keep the book. Well, I don't have to keep the book, but it is on my Pulitzer Prize shelf. It will stay there. It is a winner. You know, there are things about this book that are interesting and I can see someone finding worth rewarding. However, I just really did not get along with it. And again, I think it is a book that is aging very poorly, very quickly. But that's me. So, those are my worst books of 2023. I'd love to hear your thoughts about any and all of them in the comment section down below. And as always, I appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.